Welcome everyone to our fifth webinar in our 9-part series of the End of Life Symposium. Today's focus is on grief and bereavement at the end of life. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you a very inspiring and talented physician. She serves as the chair and course director for the End of Life Symposium, Dr. Chandana Banerjee.
Happy New Year to everybody, and welcome again to the End of Life Symposium webinar series. As you all know, for the returning webinar registrants, our symposium is divided into 3 domains: humanities, clinical practices, and medical aid in dying. Today's topic is grief and bereavement, and a very special and dear topic to me. As we all know, we all will face grief at some point in our lives. Grief is a universal emotion, yet it is so unique and individual to all living beings here on earth. We will all have to go through understanding what it means to grieve, and more so, we will have to normalize the process of grieving, especially for those that we care for at the end of life. Today's panelists are Chaplain Terry Irish and Chaplain Ada Grigg. Dr. Irish worked as a chaplain at City of Hope from September 2008 through January 2019. Terry is a board-certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains who has served over 30 years of pastoral parish ministry in the Church of the Nazarene and over 10 years as a staff chaplain here at City of Hope. Dr. Irish's numerous peer-reviewed publications include co-authoring the chapter Integrating Spirituality in Oncology Care in the inaugural edition of Oxford Handbook of Oncology Social Work in 2015. He was chosen to receive the Southern California Pain Initiative Award of Excellence in Pain Management for his contributions to the relief of pain and suffering of cancer patients in 2012. Chaplain Grigg has been a chaplain at City of Hope National Medical Center since 2015. Prior to being hired here, Chaplain Grigg has served as a hospital chaplain since 2004 in Auckland, New Zealand, where her husband is from and where they lived for many years. Chaplain Grigg is an ordained elder and an endorsed hospital chaplain within the Free Methodist denomination of Southern California and of Brazil, where she is originally from. She is also provisionally board-certified chaplain with the Association for Professional Chaplains of the United States of America. Since then, Aida has worked in cross-cultural platforms in various parts of the world, including Europe, Asia, New Zealand, Canada, America, and in her own country of Brazil, to which she attributes some of her grasp in cultural and religious awareness and sensitivity. It gives me personal pleasure and honor to have both chaplains on this webinar series. I have worked with both of them, and they exude compassion, understanding, and empathy for everyone that they touch lives from. So without further ado, Chaplain Irish, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. We appreciate that introduction. It's a privilege for Chaplain Yeda and myself to be here with you virtually to facilitate this webinar on one of our great passions, grief and bereavement at the end of life. We will address 2 aspects during this webinar: supporting patients and caregivers prior to a patient's death, and then supporting their caregivers following the death of the patient. We have nothing to disclose. The first part will be a discussion of grief and bereavement in anticipatory grief. This definition describes for us grief in its functional dimension. Grieving is a functional necessity, not a weakness. It is the method by which one heals after a significant loss. It is also the normal, appropriate emotional response to loss. It is a unique experience, and there is no general timetable. Grieving can also be described as the inward feeling of loss. It is also to be understood that grieving is personal and private, whereas mourning is public and shared. Anticipatory loss is that in anticipation experience of death. It is often referred to as preparatory grief. I provided spiritual care and support in the ICU for a patient and family for many weeks. As his condition declined, it became evident that, barring a miracle, this patient was going to die. One day, one of our ICU staff members found him crying. He was literally grieving in anticipation of his impending death. This was very appropriate and also very healthy. It was a prime example of the preparatory or anticipatory grief experience. Dr. Thomas McCormick is a faculty member of the Department of Bioethics and Humanities at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He identified 6 concerns most prevalent for patients approaching the end of life. These 6 are uncontrolled pain, clearly a great concern for those approaching the end of life. Becoming a burden. No one likes to think that they're a burden, but those coming to the end of life are very concerned about this fact. Third is financial costs. All of us are aware in our institutions of medical care that financial costs are skyrocketing. The person approaching the end of life has great concerns about this. The fourth is uncertainty about dying. Dying is a mystery, and there are great uncertainties about what it means to die. Closely related to this is number 5, anxiety, surrendering the known, all that we know about living, for the unknown related to dying. And finally, unfinished business, those things that the dying patient wants to conclude but has not yet had an opportunity to do. Ira Byock, in his book discussing what we can say and what we can't say, has described some things that could be shared by the medical staff with the families and what they could say to their loved one as he or she approaches the end of life. These 5 things are relationship completion phrases that can be very helpful to the patient toward the end of life. These 5 relationship completion phrases: please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye. Impressive phrases that can help the family and ease the loved one's the patient's final days at the end of life. 5 Wishes is a wonderful tool that can help the family and the patient come to some very clear understandings as they move towards the end of life. The first wish can even act as an advance directive. The person I want to make care decisions when I can't. An excellent tool to facilitate understanding between the patient and family and also the medical staff. Dr. Tracy Balboni's team researched the influence that certain religious beliefs on advanced cancer patients' end-of-life medical decision-making and care would contribute. The results were that they introduced a scale, a measure designed to assess religious beliefs in the context of end-of-life cancer care called the RBEC, the Religious Beliefs in End-of-Life Medical Care. Question number 5, you see on your screen that more than half of the 275 patients surveyed said that they believed that God could perform a miracle in curing their cancer. It's not uncommon to have family members ask about the possibility of a miracle for their loved one. I've had numerous discussions about this question. The miracle question is often part of the question, would you anoint our patient, our loved one, for healing with oil? My usual response is, absolutely. We serve a God who can do anything. To say or do anything other than agree that anything is possible for those of a Christian faith tradition is to take away their last hope. Bonnie Freeman recruited a superb medical team to help her develop this booklet, Final Journeys. This booklet teaches family members about the body changes that will happen as your loved one dies. Almost everyone attending and participating in this webinar has had many conversations with families asking, what will happen in my loved one's life as they approach the end of life? This booklet provides powerful and excellent information about the clinical aspects of body changes at the end of life. This panel wrote about 7 topics that are addressed with the family of a dying patient. The first is comfort. Pain can be a problem for a dying patient. The goal of the medical staff is keeping the patient comfortable. The nurse will give pain meds as needed. The second is airway, describing the breathing changes that occur during the dying process from irregular, shallow, or slow to speeding up until completely stopped. This is completely normal. Delirium. Around 80% of patients become confused, that is delirious, during the dying process, commonly caused by a loss of oxygen to the brain as the body shuts down. Restlessness. If family sees unusual movement of the legs or arms, let the nurse know, the booklet counsels. Causes can be pain or other symptoms. And it also reminds the family that they may need to give patient permission to die, perhaps the most difficult thing they will ever do. Emotional support. It reminds the family we believe the loved one will be comforted by their presence and their touch, even if the patient cannot outwardly respond. Let the staff know their needs for more privacy or emotional support. Spiritual support. Hospital chaplains can provide spiritual care and support according to the family's faith tradition, or just be present to listen, encouraging the family to let the nursing staff know if they would like the chaplain to visit, or someone from their faith community to be contacted. And finally, self-care. Having a patient die is very painful and exhausting for the family. It reminds them that nurses, chaplains, clinical social workers, and child life specialists are available to offer support, provide information on grief and bereavement, and help reaching out to the appropriate team member.
The clinician attitude towards death. Humanity has been concerned with mortality since the beginning of time, and the healthcare professionals are no exception. And how we perceive death on a personal level will also impact the effectiveness of our work. In 1974, William Worden and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross asked 6,000 healthcare providers if working with the dying patient presented to them any difficulties. Of the 98% who experienced difficulties, many said it was because the dying patient confronted them with their own mortality. This same phenomenon exists today. As the writer William Saroyan has said, everybody has got to die, but I have always believed I would be an exception. The very fact that we are finite and have only limited time makes life all the more poignant and meaningful, says researcher and clinician Dr. Teresa Randall in her book, Grief, Dying, and Death. But if still uncomfortable with death, one must ask oneself why. When was your earliest death-related experience? What has shaped your concept of death? We also know that our view of death is also shaped by a cultural context and collective psyche. There seems to be 3 general patterns of cultural response. Our view over death is shaped by cultural context. There are 3 general patterns of cultural response, as I mentioned: death accepting, death defying, and death denying. If we can go briefly in each one of them, as in primitive society like Fiji, death accepting, where death is viewed as an inevitable and natural part of the life cycle. Death defying, as in early Egypt, where people did not believe that death took anything away. So pyramids were built to contain all pharaohs' wives and possessions for the world after death. and death denying. If you guess American society today, you are right. There is in a culture a widespread refusal to confront death. The attitude is death is the opposite of living, and is not a natural part of the human experience. Also, the forever young mentality feeds the death denying culture and avoidance in the topic. As we see here, the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. A major influence on our own understanding of grief, particularly in regards to the dying patient, came undoubtedly from the works of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 60s. Although some of her grief work has been at times controversial regarding the 5 stages of grief, it seems true that as we work with the dying patients, we will see some of those stages during our interaction with them, back and forth, coming back and forth on an ongoing basis. A dying patient I'm working with at the moment, she's an outpatient who comes once a month, although at the moment more often for pain and symptom management. She helps me to understand the meaning of the words behind the Book of Common Prayer, which says, "From dying suddenly and unprepared, good Lord, deliver us." How much truth is in that? Although preparing herself for her upcoming death, she still oscillates between those 5 stages of grief. For instance, denial. At times, she's quite tearful and in utterly disbelief. She tells me, "Yeda, I am young and have so much to live for." Sometimes she's angry as she explores aloud if God is punishing her with this illness. Or bargaining, as she told me, "I just want to spend this last Christmas with my family. I hope God will allow me to do that." And by the way, she has. We spoke over Christmas. Depression, as she called me sometimes in my office to vent some of her own sadness about living her own life and her family behind, as I listen and validate her feelings, even over the phone. Acceptance. In our visit last week, she told me she does not want to die, really, but has come to accept it and have made peace with God, as she says, with herself and also with those around her. Together, we continue to attend to some of the unfinished tasks of the soul. A dying person. According to the healthcare chaplain, Bill Reynolds, there are 5 basic wants of the person who is dying. They need to feel a sense of integrity and completeness. They want to be able to make choices. They want to have companionship. They want to be able to avoid excessive pain or suffering and permission to live. To feel a sense of integrity and completeness, in their last days, people need to engage in self-reflection and reminisce about their lives and the meaning of it. They want to know that they will be remembered and that their life made a difference. I, in fact, would recommend one of the books I have been reading and using it, the Handbook of Structured Life Review, which guides people in reflecting their lives and from early childhood to the present, encouraging reminiscing, which is a natural and therapeutic human activity. We all, after all, tell stories we have lived, both good and bad, in order to make sense of our lives. And this picture that you see on the slide is part of the life review I'm doing with my dear mother, who lives in Brazil, and she's 90 now. She's fully alive, she's well. But here she's seen holding a dress that represented her very first memory as a child, when she lost her little dress on a bonfire. And as a part of her healing process, I gave her back a symbolic dress on her birthday 2 years ago. She was delighted. A dying person also wants to be able to make choices. People often die the way they live. A quiet person may prefer a darkened room with a music playing soft, while others want to be surrounded by a circle of family and friends with laughter and jokes. The dying need these final expressions of their own individuality. The dying person wants to have companionship. One thing they will say, "Do not abandon me." Not just have someone in the room, but have someone truly present. And being truly present means talking, asking questions, sharing feelings, laughing, crying. The same things that makes our relationships meaningful as we do life. A dying person also wants to avoid excessive pain or suffering. Perhaps this is one of the greatest fears about dying, that it will be painful. For persons to die with dignity, they want to die without that kind of pain or worry. Thank goodness, medicine today make it possible for many people to die with a minimal physical discomfort. That is probably no more important issue for us caregivers to honor and to attend. And lastly, the dying person wants permission to leave. A 17-year-old might want to know that his or her parents will be okay. A middle-aged man might want to know his wife will be okay. Are you going to be okay if I go? Giving permission helps the dying person know that the family and the loved ones will find their way when they're gone, and they will find not only their way, but they will be okay. When they know this, they can complete their own goodbyes. The grieving dying person also have tasks, teaches on the 5 tasks of the living, that is you and I. These are in fact all things we should be attending to as we go on with our daily lives. Find meaning in your life. You may ask questions, how have I lived my life? What has been important to me? What did I give to others? What did I receive from others? Did I live according to my beliefs and values? Heal relationships. Deal with any ongoing resentment. Ask forgiveness, offer thanks, give love. Acknowledge joys, achievements, milestones, yours and of others. Find meaning in suffering and ways to transcend it. What am I learning from this crisis? Have I been able through this experience to make a deeper connection with life, with others? Develop a personal understanding of death. What do I believe it happens after death? Do I have some spiritual, religious beliefs that ground me? With whom am I comfortable to talk about death? How can this person support me? And finally, make preparations. Put your affairs in order. It does not need to be a taboo. Complete a will, advance care directive. Discuss your wishes with your loved ones. Let go of attachments. Give things away. Keep your home simple and uncluttered. As you do this, there is an uncluttering of the soul, I hear, that takes place inside of us as well. And this is a chaplain assessment of explicit spiritual concerns of patients in palliative care. I thought this would be enriching our discussion today and our presentation. In it, we are able to grade the level of existential spiritual distress experienced by a patient. We go through some of the list. Need for meaning in the face of suffering. The patient that you are seeing is having perhaps a difficulty coming to terms with changes and things that gave meaning to life. Key relationships, diminishing quality of life. A patient that I have been working recently shared with me that the hardest thing he's finding at the end of life is to have lost control of it. Need for integrity, legacy, generativity. What are we talking about? The patient questions the meaning of their lives, whether the life they have lived has meaning. Patient question whether they have made a positive contribution to loved ones and society. A dying patient who was a teacher and I was called to attend to him at his desk, he asked me, how do I know that I have fulfilled my mission here on earth? Concerns about relationships. The patients have unfinished business with significant others. This is often that chaplains are called to attend, needing to overcome estrangement, for forgiveness, reconciliation. The patient has concern about how the family will cope without him or without her. A couple that asked me for intervening and helping them to reconcile their differences before the husband's death. Concerns or fear about death or dying. The patient feels unready for death. It's hesitant to discuss about it. If the unreadiness is expressed in terms of tasks, look again under need for integrity. Perhaps he needs to finish that task. Does he or she fears death as a concept or as a dying process? It is an important difference. A patient asked me to help him to find his brother who needed to be reconciled, with hoping that he would not die before doing this task. Making decisions about treatment. This patient is distressed about the end-of-life treatment and seeks alignment with his or her own beliefs. And lastly, religious and spiritual struggles. The patient wonders if they are being abandoned or punished by God. The patient questions about God, the transcendent. The patient is alienated from formerly meaningful connections or their community of faith. I remember so well, vividly, a dying patient in New Zealand asked me to offer him communion after many years, as he told me that he was away from his Anglican faith tradition. What a joy to see him reconcile on the chapel just prior to his death and accepting with tears the communion that was offered to him that day.
The second part is grief and bereavement, loss of mourning after a caregiver for caregivers following the death of the patient. I attended a PEDS patient and her family, providing spiritual care and compassionate support. Her father was especially close to her and was deeply distressed as his daughter slipped from this life. After she died, I was with this deeply grieving father as he tried to figure out what he needed to do next. He turned to me and asked, "So, chaplain, do I need to get my truck, back it up close, and carry my daughter's body to my truck and drive her to the funeral home?" At that point, I was moved to tears as my tears joined the tears of this broken-hearted man, as together we shared in this common grief and loss. I was also amazed that he did not know that we were here to help him make those arrangements. I let him know that we would help him take good care of his daughter. I carried copies of this booklet with me every day in my City of Hope chaplain's notebook. That day, I handed a copy to this deeply grieving father as a source to help him know what to do. It contains important information about what to do now, tasks to take care of in a few days, what to do later, tasks to take care of in the weeks coming, grieving, how women grieve, how men grieve, tasks to help move forward toward healing, how children grieve in age groups from 1 and 2 years old through 13 and 17, and talking to your children, saying goodbye. Even a fill in the blanks letter that an adult can help a child write a letter to the one who has died. Frequently asked questions and suggested readings for children 3 through 7, school age, teens, and adults. Bereavement is defined as the event of loss, of death itself. It is derived from the Old English word bereafion, which means to be robbed. I have no doubts that the father felt like he had been robbed from the previous and precious life of the daughter that would not move forward into the future, robbed of the future that he would have with her that was now cut short, robbed of the time he would walk her down the aisle on her wedding day, robbed of the time to hold his grandchildren. No parent ever dreams of outliving their child. This is every parent's nightmare. The chaplains are just one of the teams that provide support for grief and bereavement, loss, and the mourning after. One of the best practices, you might already do this, is to offer families of children who have died the opportunity to come together and remember their precious children. We call these annual pediatric events celebrations of life. Another event you might consider is an annual adult gathering for those who have had an adult family member die. This best practice is one that we do here at City of Hope. Chaplains or spiritual care providers at your institution offer grief and bereavement support to patient families and staff members. If you are grieving and in pain, you could talk to someone about your loss. And you can do that by giving the chaplain at your institution a call. Chaplains are highly trained and are very willing to listen. Bereavement support groups are another great way to help in your institutions. Dr. Alan Wolfelt is one of the world's leading experts in bereavement support and care. Our bereavement support group model uses the curriculum of Dr. Wolfelt. We provide support groups for grieving spouses, parents, adults, children, and youth grieving with loved ones, following the companioning concept, which is being present to another person's pain. It is not about taking away their pain. You might try something like getting started with a specific loss group in your bereavement support. The way we did it is to start a pilot group. Ours was with pediatric parents, or consider a focused loss group and open this to anyone who has lost a loved one to a specific disease, such as cancer. You might consider providing these participants of the weekly sessions with a pre-session dinner, the study book, and any handouts or printouts that you use. You might even consider doing multiple bereavement groups, meeting at the same time in different places, at the same location, by age, meeting together to remember a loved one, adults, spouses, children, and teens, such as those represented in this picture of group number 4. It works very well if they're all grieving the same family member who died. Wolfelt in 2003 suggested that there are 6 important needs to understand about someone who is dying. The first is to accept the reality of the need. The first important need is to acknowledge and accept the reality of the one who has died. The second is to feel the pain. There are numerous ways to avoid the pain, as Chaplain Yeda has already mentioned. Numbing the pain keeps the mourner from beginning to truly grieve the loss. The third is to remember the person who has died. The need is not to forget, but to cherish those memories that you have of that loved one. The fourth is to develop a new self-identity. A prime example is the couple, John and Sue. John has tragically died. Now Sue must develop a new identity without saying, well, we were a couple, but I don't know who I am anymore. Sue needs to develop an identity by herself. So important to her mourning to progress to a new identity by herself. Fifth is finding and searching for meaning. The mourner needs to find meaning after the death. A primary example is the mother who said, I lost my only child. Am I still a mother? The answer comes back, you will always be a mother, but it's now finding meaning without that child in her life. And finally, let others help you now and always. This is vital to the mourner, being open to receive help, letting others help and give you a hand and offer you the opportunity to move forward.
As we have discussed about anticipatory grief, we now speak about grief, bereavement, and loss in the morning after. Support and intervention, assist the grieving family in the morning after. I never forget when growing up in Brazil, when I was 13 or 14 years of age, when my mother told me about the death of one of our neighbors. This was my first recollection on the topic of death. I remember thinking, I'll stand by the gate tomorrow and I'll wait until Mr. So-and-so passes by, and I will see what a person who lost someone looks like in the morning after. How could I ever guess that this would become my life's work and passion? And after 20 years or more working in this field, I have found some things that are quite helpful. And even though obvious, one must need to offer presence. Someone has said that 99% of life is just showing up. The ability to sit with someone who is expressing great pain without trying to fix it or make it better is the greatest gift we can give and offer to someone. As Dorothy Soeli, a German theologian, has said in her book, Suffering, suffering needs to be witnessed in order to be validated. Also, we can let them tell their stories. How many countless numbers of people I have sat and listen to them telling their story of their loved ones. For those who are grieving, there is nothing more important than the memories of their loved ones. Memories validate their relationships and remind them that they have reason to grieve. Most importantly, by creating stories of our memories, we enter into the therapeutic process that the act of remembering can generate. Here is a quote by Henry Nouwen in the topic of being present in grief. Listen, the friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That's a friend who cares. This is one of the pictures of one of our bereavement support groups here at City of Hope that I facilitated a few years back. How much I have learned with those beautiful ladies and their resilience facing life, as the quote just in the past said. The most profound and beautiful woman that I have worked with as they have grieved and have sought to overcome and making life even better today. But we continue the loss and mourning after. We continue to see what to do in order to assist the grieving family in the morning after. We provide, of course, practical help. If they have a to-do list, what we can do to help with meals, shopping, phone calls, this is the basic. Yet, there is a series of tasks that one must attend to when supporting the grieving family, allowing for the grieving and the mourning process to start. Alleviate the grieving family of any extra tasks or burdens, remind them of the need of self-care. In providing practical help, one of the very first steps as healthcare professional is that difficult but so much needed phone call and perhaps that sympathy card that will follow. But also as we take time to listen to them in that grief-stricken stage. After all, not everyone can sustain that level of engagement with those who are grieving. Information about resources, realize that a grief is a normal part of life has another important implication to support people. We cannot change the fact that people experience loss in their lives. It is not our job to fix for them. Our task is to assist them and to identify and develop skills they need to cope with life moving forward. And here, as Reverend Terry also mentioned to you, loss and mourning, the 4 tasks of mourning. He expressed the 6 that was addressed by Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and this is the 4 tasks by William Warden's, the 4 tasks of grieving. Accept the reality of the loss, experience the pain of grief, adjust to environment which the deceased is missing, and finally find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. Okay, moving forward, I would describe first just the fact that accept the reality of the loss, experience the pain of grief, adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing, and find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life would be important for us, healthcare professionals, those working in the hospital, to address as we help the families in grief. We could not conclude our presentation today without mentioning something about the grief that we see all around us, grief in a time of COVID, the lingering, complicated grief. A multifaceted grief experience. There is a lot of loss out there, says Alan Giordano, director of outpatient service at Penn Medicine in Princeton. He says millions of people lost their jobs, lost their normal routine, and most of all have lost life. Yet, as we all see, COVID-19 has not given us the respite or luxury to pay attention to any of our losses, in particular, by the very nature and speed in which it has come to us. This has turned into a paramount loss. In that, we lost the very way in which we grieve, which has been and always will be a communal and shared experience. This moment can be a very fertile ground for what we call complicated grief, which is a syndrome in which healing is impeded and acute grief is intense and prolonged due to a set of circumstances that a person finds herself stuck in a process. For instance, the absence of rituals surrounding the dying, such as visitation by the bedside, the opportunity to say goodbye, viewing the body as a way to come to terms to the reality of death, finding comfort and support through shivas, funerals, memorial services. The main trigger will be the inability to say a proper goodbyes for the ones we love. These feelings can linger for years to come. And lastly, the response to grief in the time of COVID. Our world is sick and in need of healing. With COVID-19 continue to spread across the world with more than 85 million confirmed cases in 190 countries and nearly 2 million deaths, with 350,000 of them in America alone. As healthcare provider, it is in our DNA to want to alleviate suffering, particularly as we witness this collective grief all around us. In our shared humanity, we grieve with those who grieve today in the enormity of their losses. Some lost their homes, their livelihoods, their loved ones, and most of us, even our way of life. We stretch out our hands, and we stretch out our hands ready to work and help in any way we can. We show up where we feel we can be most useful, give a word of comfort for those in despair, offer a respite for a struggling colleague, not to mention about the cumulative grief experienced now by the healthcare community today in the danger of burnout, compassion, fatigue. Then we stop and ponder, not only in our own mortality and of those around us, but more importantly, in our lives and the way we are living. And we ask ourselves, what will be our legacy for this hour? And indeed, for the years to come. This crisis has the ability, and it will shape us for years to come, and even our own generation. Thank you very much. I pass now the final touch for Dr. Banerjee.
Chaplain Greg, and thank you, Chaplain Irish. And thank you for everyone for some of the questions submitted. Although we don't have a lot of time to address all the questions, we will try our best to do so. This question was asked, how do we get a copy of the book Final Journeys? This is a City of Hope booklet, and you can always contact City of Hope and the Supportive Medicine Division, and they will be able to provide you with a copy of the booklet. Some of the questions that came up are universal, and so I will address as many as I can, so thank you. Question one is for Chaplain Irish. You described using the booklet When Someone You Love Dies, A Guide to Bereavement, to help grieving families. At what point is it appropriate to provide bereavement resource to a family? Also, are chaplains the only staff members that offer such bereavement resources to their family? Chaplain Irish.
That's a really good question. The booklet is designed to be used with families who are beginning to ask questions. And if they begin to ask questions like the gentleman I described, that would be a good time to give them that booklet. On the other hand, there are some families who are so focused on anticipatory grief that it would not be a good time. So chaplains are always assessing. We taught nurses and staff members how to do a diagnosis and see when the booklet would be best given to them, and then they would be handed to them. Chaplains are not the only ones that use the booklet. It's also something that the nurses use. It's also child life specialists. And we're also strongly reliant on some of the other team members to help us also distribute them to the patients or to the family members who are dealing with the loss of a loved one.
Thank you. One of the other questions that came up is, how do we address grief and bereavement for a family that does not believe, or a person that does not believe in God? This question is for Chaplain Greg.
Yes, it's a very, very good question, very relevant for the work we do. I have also started many years ago, 20 years ago or so, in hospitals, thinking of precisely on that too. Yes, I have come to understand that when someone does not trust, does not believe there is a God or a transcendent, we always go, I have always gone to what brings meaning to that person. What is meaningful to you? And to some families, I stay right there because remember, the chaplains or the healthcare professionals will not come with our agenda. We receive what the patient has to, or the family has to offer us and wants to ask us. So I would say to the family, the person, if there is not a God, I will not go there. What brings meaning to you? And that many families have told me, a patient has told me, the family, my family brings meaning to me. My grandchildren gives me strength. And then we stay with that. We stay with the family. We stay with the grandchildren that gives meaning to them. It is their work, their career. What make life meaningful for you?
Just addressed how do we address family grieving as a family unit, and I think both chaplains in the presentations did address this issue of the family being grieving together, as well as the uniqueness of individual grief. Chaplain Irish, would you like to address that a little bit more in terms of how does the family cope together in the grieving process?
Well, I think probably in a lot of families, there are one or two people that are the go-to people in the family. I know that a lot of times I have seen very strong people in the family that tend to carry a lot of the load. In the ICU, it's been amazing surrounding the bed and supporting the family as the patient is dying and letting them rely on each other. I think one of the great things that helps is having them come together and remember the patient. If the patient is actively dying, to share stories. It's always amazing to hear them talk about the loved one who is actively dying. And it's almost inevitable that somebody in the family, it may be a grandchild or a great grandchild, that will say, I remember when grandpa did this, and the whole family will laugh. Laughter is okay. Sometimes they're afraid, and it's one of the little children that will lead them into a time of remembering and truly celebrating that life. But a lot of times it will be that strong person in the family that will say, you know, my dad was a great man and he did this for us and he helped us. And that's the way the family begins to come together and begins to heal, by remembering those things that were so important. But the family together beginning to heal as the family member dies or after the family member has died. And one of the important things is ritual, sharing together some things that bring them together, whether it's a funeral or a memorial service. And right now under COVID, as Chaplain Grieg talked about it, COVID has made so many interruptions to the ritual. And whether it's a virtual ritual or whether it's getting together for a memorial service, remember, grieving delayed does not mean it's grieving denied. And having some time together, even later, is so critical for sharing the memories and the time that you had with that loved one, is one of the ways that healing can begin and healing can move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaplain Greg, and thank you, Chaplain Irish. We really appreciate you coming to us and talking to us, especially in today's day and time. With that, we don't have much more time for questions and answers, but we will, if you reach out to us, we will try and address these questions that you may have had. I will, at this point, conclude today's session by handing it off to Crystal Saavedra, our wonderful director of CME.
For more educational opportunities or to reference today's recording, please visit us at cityofhope.org/CME. Please join us next month on February 4th when we will discuss how medical aid in dying really works in authorized states. And thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next time.